y'all. Welcome to Cross Politic. It's our midweek fix. Pastor Toby Chalk Knox, and I'm the Water Boy. It's good to be with you. We also have in the studio Dr. Victor Hanson. We're going to be bringing him here in a moment. But before we get there, we actually signed our contract for our Fight Laugh Feast conference in Knoxville, Tennessee.
When is the date?
Wait. What did you say? Knoxville?
Knoxville, Tennessee.
Not
October 6th through the 8th. So this is actually the first time we're announcing it.
Yeah.
Mark your calendars, October 6th through the 8th in Knoxville, Tennessee. Excited. We got a great event center there. Knoxville's actually kind of a pretty cool town.
Yeah, nice.
So we're moving from Nashville to Knoxville.
Yep. Just a little bit over.
You gonna talk about the title of the conference at all? You want to talk about that?
Yeah.
Should we mention title?
Mention the title.
Do we want to roll that out?
No, we'll wait. We'll roll it out.
All right.
Theonomony is a podcast exploring what the Bible teaches us about money and finance from a theonomic perspective. Listen and learn what God's law teaches Christians today about how to manage their finances, as well as how King Jesus says governments should run their economies. After all, economics comes from the word house law in Greek. Theonomony is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many other podcast catchers. You can find links to the Theonomony podcast in our show notes. As Gabe mentioned, we're grateful to have with us on the show today Victor Davis Hanson. He's the Martin and Illy Anderson Senior Fellow in Residence in Classics and Military History at the Hoover Institution, Stanford University, a professor of classics emeritus, California State University, Fresno, and a nationally syndicated columnist for Tribune Media Services. He's written basically for everybody on the planet.
Yeah.
He's also,
Except for us.
he's also the Wayne and Marcia Busk Distinguished Fellow in History at Hillsdale College, where he teaches each fall semester courses in military history and classical culture. Dr. Hanson also is a fifth successive generation to live in the same house on his family's farm.
Wow.
And he was a full-time orchard and vineyard grower from 1980 to 1984.
Is there a little Hanson Malo that you guys have, or a little cab sav, Victor cab sav or something?
I don't know, but I'm sitting in a room where my great-great-grandmother built it, I guess, in 1870.
Wow.
Which is old. It's not old for the rest of the country, but out here in California, that's old.
Well,
Yeah.
Dr. Hanson,
1870.
thank you very much for joining us on Cross Politic.
Okay. Glad to be here.
Well, so given the trucker protests in Canada, we saw the last few weeks, massive unpopularity of Democratic policies, and the midterm elections upon us, do you think the Russian-Ukraine situation is being trumped up by Democrats and mainstream media in order to distract us from all the problems at home?
Yeah, I think it depends. I don't want to sound weaselly, but what you mean by Trump. Now, if it's being used by the media and Democratic operatives to explain away gas prices and inflation, absolutely. And as we know, inflation's from printing $5 trillion of money
Right.
without commensurate growth in population or productivity. So that, and then we were pumping almost 13 million barrels 14 months ago, and under Biden, we're down to about 9 something. So you take 3.5 million barrels off the world market at a time of increased demand, and you're going to get high prices and et cetera. So that's, to blame the economy on something like Ukraine is ridiculous. What I think they're doing now is that they have humiliated themselves. I think it's a little different. I think that Vladimir Putin wants to restore the borders. We all know the Soviet Union. He can't do it really because he's got 100 million less people than the Soviet Union did, and about a third of his territory has disappeared. So he waits there, kind of like a lion waiting to pounce, but he can't really unless we help him. And we know when we help him, we cut back on oil or the price rises. He gets rich, we're short, we're desperate, our economy's in trouble. That happened in 2008 when we had an oil crisis. He went into Georgia. We know that when we appease him, in other words, we talk tough, Biden called him a killer. And then he went over and begged and said, please, please pump oil. And please, please, if you're going to hack us, put 16 entities off limits. Just don't hack these. So when you combined braggadocio and appeasement, then that wets Putin's beak. The other thing is NATO. I mean, NATO's got 1 billion people, 8 times the economy of Russia. But when it starts to fight among itself, and it doesn't really know whether it should, could, maybe not protect itself, and when Germans poll that they're more fond of Russians than Americans, and same as the Turks, and they're the two biggest country in NATO, and they sign an oil deal, then Putin says this NATO thing is a joke. So what he does then in 2008 or 2014 or 2022, he starts to put troops right on the border, sort of like hitting a little eggshell with a hammer and see where it cracks, and just sits there and said, how do you like this? And then he wants to see an opening, and he's got a lot of openings because the West seems to be weak and disorganized. And so that's the reality. And now Biden knows that their laxity caused this. So now he's overreacting and saying, this is an existential crisis. This is this. It is a crisis, but he created it.
Right. Just
like Obama created it, just like the Bush administration, when they were floundering in Iraq, created it.
Wow.
So you said the West is weak. I guess that's kind of focusing here on America. Let's just stay there for a second. What's making us weak ultimately? Does Putin, and what is it?
It's certainly not a population. We have 340 million people almost. It's not our geography. We've got one of the biggest area masses of any country in the world. It's not our natural resources. We've got more gas and oil than any country in the world, apparently. Maybe not in reserve. We have the second largest coal deposits. It's not our educational system, at least at the highest level, because if you look at the top 20 universities rated by the British of all people, 18 of them are American and 5 of them are in California. So we've got everything, but we have the largest and most productive agricultural sector in the world. We're the center of high tech. So why are we so inept? And the answer is that I think that globalization enriched 2 corridors, the East and West Coast. People had skills that could be globalized: insurance law, finance, tech, academia, media, and they wrote off the interior of the country where, people were very important, but they were logging, they were farming, they were drilling, they were muscular labor, and they deprecated that. And that caused a lot of tensions within the country, because those countries, if you look at the last 12 or 13 years, their real wages went down. And then you add into the matrix that students owe $1.7 trillion in debt. And it looks like that's a contributor to marrying later, having very few, if any, children. If your first child, I think the average age was 28, just 20 years ago, is up to 32. And home ownership has gone down again. And the age when people buy their first home has gone way into their late 30s, 40s. So we have all these problems, but I think it's based on the idea that certain people were losers and certain people were winners. And if you look at our media, Wall Street, corporate boardroom, professional sports, entertainment, Hollywood, K through 12, academia, Silicon Valley, NPR, PBS, CBS, they're all revolutionaries in the sense that they are progressive activists, and yet they don't represent the majority of the people. Right. So there's a tension there that people feel that liberty and freedom are more important than mandated equality. That was something that was not in our experience. That was the French Revolution, not the American Revolution. Yeah. So yet we feel these postal elites are trying to force it down everybody's throat.
So when Trump was president in when he was president, you wrote a book basically giving us the metaphor that Trump was like chemo. He was medicine or a harsh medicine, toxic medicine to the American politic. But he was like the kind of medicine that was chemo. So it's still dealing with some bad problems in our country. Yeah. Is part of what's going on? Do we kind of miss that chemo?
Yeah, I guess we do, because if you look at all the problems that either by polls or by just the facts of the case, they weren't problems. 2 years ago. We had a basically secure border. We've had 2 million people come in the last 14 months illegally.
Right.
And in a time of a pandemic without vaccinations or, tests even. And then when you look at Afghanistan, he had a plan to leave about 3,500 people at Bagram. We just spent $400 million on the air base, $1 billion on the embassy. We had $80 billion of equipment. We gave it all away. That wasn't going to happen under Trump. I think you could look at black unemployment. It was the lowest in history, down to about 5.2. It's actually gone up under Biden. And while there were racial tensions, I think that he was the first Republican in my life, and I'm registered as an independent, that started for the first time to peel away minorities from the Democratic Party because he was a populist and he felt comfortable with the middle class. So he kind of destroyed that stereotype of wealthy white guys like Mitt Romney on the golf course. It didn't appeal to the working class. I guess what I'm saying is he redefined the Republican Party as a class party rather than just more white. So a lower class white person, I say lower class without deprecation, but income-wise, had more in common with a black person or a brown person, vice versa, than he did with an elite at Stanford. And that was a new revolutionary idea. And that had just started to take off. And people couldn't believe it. And they looked at the polls, 45% now to 50% of Hispanics feel more comfortable with Republicans. Black males have gone from about 7-8% favorability to Trump, or up to about 15%. So it's not definitive yet, but it's starting to, and that was something that nobody anticipated. But in foreign policy and energy development, we had a very low inflation, about 2%. We had pretty good growth, 2.5%. It's very hard to see where he went wrong on any major issue, except his chemotherapy bothered a lot of people. And they reacted. Anytime he put his fingerprints on an issue, the issue was supposedly tainted. So we had all these elite Republicans, these never Trumpers, that suddenly said, oh my God, I can't vote for all the things I told you for my entire life I was for, and I raised money and I shook down donors for, because this guy is orange and he's got funny hair and he's got a Queen's accent, got this ugly long tie. I just don't want anything to do. And he's my view of an intellectual, so, or a politician. So, and Trump is what he is. If you try to tell him, you don't really need to say you should fire Anthony Fauci, but you don't need to say that he throws like a girl when he throws a ball. That's not going to persuade him.
Is there anybody you think right now outside of Trump that still might be a form of chemo, or maybe an easier form of chemo?
You mean that would cut through all of the pathologies we have without making us quite as sick as medicine? Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, I think there's a lot of people, and you've got Governor DeSantis. He's a fighter. It seems like he's taken on a lot of people, and Pompeo seems like he just weighed in today about the truckers in Canada, and Tom Cotton has been really good on the woke FBI and Pentagon. But we don't know, because we have to go through this process. If you and I had this conversation in 2016, I might have said, well, I saw Donald Trump on The Apprentice. I don't want that guy as president, but my ideal is a hands-on, can-do, working-class governor like Scott Walker. But then when they went on the stage, Trump just dominated Walker. He just melted. So we don't know until they get out there. But I think, you talk to Donald Trump. I know people. I've talked to him a couple of times, and he would tell you that just as you can't have sunshine without the sun, you can't have Trumpism without Trump. But I think you can. So
you mentioned what's going on with the truckers and Justin Trudeau. I mean, if the Prime Minister of Canada came over for dinner tonight, what would you say to him?
I'd say take off that blackface.
That's it. Or why did you walk out and protest with Antifa and BLM, and then you put other people in jail? I guess I'd say to him that you destroyed a tradition that Canadians had, that they were freedom-loving people, and they'd only invoke martial law 2 or 3 times in their history when it was World War II or there was dire straits. But he doesn't believe in freedom. He doesn't believe in constitutional government. And he bought into this idea that people like himself on the coast or elites, whether it's in Canada, the United States, have some entitlement. They feel they're more articulate. So he thought that he could say to the truckers, you had Confederate flags, or you're Nazis, or you're racist, or this, and he could slur them and smear them, and no one in the media would call him out, and nobody did. And so I think those are very dangerous people, these coastal elites that we have. They're never subject to the consequences of their ideology. They rail about walls on the border, and you go by their homes in the Bay Area, they all have walls.
Right.
They hate teachers' unions. They love teachers' unions. They hate homeschooling.
Right.
They hate charter. Their kids are all in prep school.
Right.
And they want energy to be, Stephen Chu said he wanted it to be $9. They're not upset because they don't drive. They live in cities. They're not out driving in Wyoming or Utah or Central Valley of California.
Well, why is it their hypocrisy doesn't haunt them so that it gets them out of positions of power? Because I've watched this over the last 4 or 6 years, really. Liberal hypocrisy doesn't seem to matter at all, and they still get in positions where they have the ability to enforce some of these laws on us, and that doesn't make any sense to me.
I think it goes down to they don't believe in democracy like we do, or constitution. We believe that we want to appeal to the traditions and customs, religion, common values of the majority of people.
Right.
They feel they can get power through institutions. So you look at how you and I think in this country. We're communicating right now via Zoom, which is the Silicon Valley and Chinese partially owned, but it's left wing. Yep. Our email, Google, or Microsoft is left wing.
Yep.
Facebook is left wing. Google, Apple is really left wing. Twitter is left wing. Then you look at the major newspapers: New York Times, Chicago Tribune, LA Times, Washington, left wing. How about our public? Isn't that nonpartisan? NPR, PBS, right. Very left wing. Right. And then you say, well, wait a minute. Let's look at the corporate boardroom. They used to know corporate boardroom is way out there on stakeholder capitalism and all this stuff. Then you look at Wall Street. Wall Street is left wing. They outfunded Hillary by 3-1 over Trump. She raised almost $3 billion. And then you say, well, how about academia? 93% of a recent poll said that professors were Democrats. How about K through 12 teachers and the teachers unions and the education departments? How about the NBA? How about the NFL? How about the Super Bowl halftime show? How about Major League Baseball? How about sitcoms? How about Hollywood movies? So we're in an echo chamber. It's 360 degrees. I don't know why there are not more leftists, because they're the left is basically saying to Americans, listen, we'll make a devil's pact with you. You be for enforced equality of result, large government, let an elite run your lives for you that knows a lot more than you do, and we'll give you insurance. So if you say something stupid about transgenderism, we'll forgive you. Yep. If you're Joe Biden and you have a history of racist comments, whether it's the other day he said, hey boy, to an African-American professional, he said, junkie, he said, you ain't black, put you all in chains. Barack Obama was the first white person, first articulate African-American candidate. He said, I mean, I could go on, but he got an exemption for every one of those. And then the same thing with women. If you touch a woman or you do something, Tara Reid says this about Biden, no matter. Yeah. So that's why it's so attractive to people, because the left says to them, enlist, be part of us, and we'll give you an indemnity policy. And they do. And I know that a lot of writers in my business will say, well, secretly, Victor, everything I wanted, Trump did in those 4 years. But, if I say that, then I'm considered a nut, and then my book won't be reviewed in the New York Times book review, and Amazon will delay my shipments of my book, and New York Times won't put my book in the books. They do funny things. Wow. And they're right, they do. So that's what they've done. They've got control of the institutions of government. I'm not even getting into the bureaucracy. James Comey, John Clapper, John Brennan, Anthony Fauci, Lois Lerner. But,
Man, Dr. Hanson, you're a history professor, classics professor.
Yeah.
History repeats itself, or at least it echoes. What moment in history do you most think of as you're thinking about the moment we're in right now?
Well, there was two big transitions. One was from an agrarian, rural, republican Italy into a world empire, and that was around somewhere between 30 BC, and it was finished by about 70 AD. Didn't mean that Rome collapsed, but it just meant that its values were so diluted and so spread, and we're not able to create a uniform culture. And that's something like it's happening, not just in the United States, but the world. Mm-hmm. We don't have this, we don't have a shame culture anymore. We're not a religious people. That's happening. But it doesn't mean we're not going to be wealthy and decadent and luxurious and have appetite. The other point that I often think about is that system started to break down in the 5th century AD, and the Roman Empire was confronted with two alternatives. One was to decentralize, incorporate people, not integrate them, not assimilate them, not make them speak Latin, or the Eastern Empire that was largely Greeks in Byzantium said, you know what, we're going to have an Orthodox religion and we're going to stamp out schisms, and maybe that's not liberal, but we're going to get everybody on the Christian page. We're going to have one culture, Greek. We're not going to be apologetic, and our capital's at Constantinople. And that Byzantine Empire lasted 1,000 years, whereas the West broke into the Dark Ages and then what was feudal Europe. And I think we're in that point right now where about a large portion of the Western civilization says we have no apologies. We don't have to be perfect to be good. We're better than the alternative. There were certain building blocks of our culture that we're going to honor, family, parenthood. It's better to have 2 or 3 kids if you can than have none. These are very controversial things to say. And biology governs your sex, not what you construct out of it. Right. And not to mean that there's not dysphoria, but it's not a major epidemic of dysphoria biologically.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of people now that are going to say they have so diluted American culture that I'm just going to double down on it, and I'm going to I don't want to have a fight. I'm just going to have a monastery in the mind. And how that translates in the real world is you talk to people. I'm always surprised. There's people who tell me, I have not been to a Hollywood movie in 10 years. I have not been stepped foot into a theater in 5 years. I have not watched network television in 6 years. I have not read the New York Times. Mm-hmm. I do not read the Washington Post. I do not turn on the NBA because I don't want to be lectured to. And they've kind of dropped out of popular culture. And they do things like homeschool, or they move to places like Tennessee or Utah or
Idaho,
Alabama even. I've talked to a lot of people. I've just talked to some African-American people in the Bay Area, and they're all moving back to Alabama.
Yep.
And they say it's safer, and people are friendlier, and they're nicer, and people get along much better than they did in the. I thought,
wow, that's funny.
Back in the Bama. Oh wow, Victor Davis Hanson, sir. Thank you so much for joining us on Cross Politics. I'd love to have you back anytime. We can get you. Gabe, work that out.
Yeah.
You need to go right now to Amazon and get anything from Victor Davis Hanson. I'm serious. It's really good. I particularly like The Dying Citizen right now. That is a very, very important book that you need to have. If you're single, get married. If you're married, have kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until Sunday, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politics.
Thank you.
When tyrants take over, what's the first thing they do? Disarm. It happened in Russia, China, Germany, and most recently, Afghanistan. Why? Because disarmed people are easier to control. And over the last century and a half, American tyrants have been carrying out a slow, methodical disarmament that no one is talking about. State education. Tyrants know that education is warfare. Our rulers have a vested interest in making you totally harmless. They've got big plans and they don't want you getting in the way. Think about it. Would you rather fight an army decked out with high-powered rifles or a bunch of dinky water pistols? They know that if you can think critically, you're a threat. At New St. Andrews College, we want to graduate men and women who are dangerous. Dangerous to the world, dangerous to the principalities and powers, dangerous to spiritual wickedness in high places. Education can either arm you or disarm you. It can make you a threat or make you a useful idiot. So, where you get that education counts. Click the link to apply to New St. Andrews College today.